Hello, everybody. This is Austin in Focus, and we're in El Paso, Texas, God's country, the best community on earth. And our guest today is Mayor John Cook of the city of El Paso. Mayor, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me on, Senator. It's a pleasure to be here and get a chance to talk about what's happening in El Paso and how Austin impacts El Paso and vice versa.
Well, I want to first thank you for such good work over the years and the partnership that we've had in trying to push these endeavors, not just here, but in Austin, in Washington, D.C., and increasingly in Chihuahua and Mexico City, because when you look at what we're trying to do as a region, we have to go many places to get our work done. And I don't know that the people of El Paso realize how much you have to travel and you have to be in those places to advocate for the agenda of El Paso. So I want to personally thank you for all the work that you're doing.
That. You know, when I first came into office as the mayor, the very first thing I did is sat down and had a regional economic summit. And I'm going to concentrate on that word regional, because I think all too often what had happened before was people looked at El Paso just as an island unto itself, not taking in New Mexico and Mexico and the impact that they have on our economy, on our environment, on our health, transportation issues. And I think we have to really start looking at a holistic view of the region if we want to become more competitive with other regions.
I think there's no question about that. If you look across the globe, those places that have integrated economies and made themselves competitive in getting jobs in their education system, the universities have to be competitive because you're competing with Shanghai. When a job comes to El Paso, oftentimes you look and say, where else were you considering? Well, we had this place in Germany, we had this place in Shanghai, and that's changing with energy. Energy is driving a lot of those decisions now, so we've just got to compete. But the political nature of that is that the El Paso champions, we've got to travel. I mean, you end up having to go to, I've spent a lot of this last year in Canada, because I think for the first time we have that border now joining with us to make borders more competitive, to have safe transportation of goods and people in these border ports. You never saw that before in Canada. For the first time you see it now. I want to talk to you a little bit and have you share with our audience some of your life experiences. I want to go to Vietnam. You served in Vietnam. You don't often talk about that in the public, but help us understand what you were going through during that period of your life.
You know, I joined the Army in 1967. I was a student at St. Francis College in Brooklyn. I had a really good paying job with Western Electric Company, and I decided I wanted to go serve my country in Vietnam. Walked down to a recruiter and I said, I want to go to Vietnam, can you help me? And he said, raise your right hand. So it was pretty rare in '67 that people were volunteering to go. At that time, most everybody was drafted. But I went to a language assessment, and they found out that I had a skill at languages. So
where does that come from? Did you have?
It's sort of a funny story, but it came from Sister Huberta, my mentor in high school. And when I entered Immaculata High School on 33rd Street and 3rd Avenue in Manhattan, I had a really heavy Brooklyn accent. And she called me over one day and said, young man, where do you go to school? And I said, Immaculata, sister. And she grabbed me by my sideburn and said, that's Immaculata. She said, and where is Immaculata? I said, Manhattan, sister. And she grabbed me by the other sideburn. You notice I don't wear them anymore? And said, that's Manhattan. And then she said, and where in Manhattan is Immaculata? And I said, don't make me say it. She said, I want to hear it one time. I said, okay, 33rd Street and 3rd Avenue. She said, you are so good at foreign languages. You're going to take 4 years of Latin and 3 years of any European language that we offer. So I took 4 years of Latin, 3 years of French, 1 year of Italian. So when I went in the Army, of course, they said you had an ability for foreign languages, which is really how I got to El Paso. The Vietnamese language school for the Army was in El Paso. They had 100 instructors. It was 10 students per class. And the first 6 months, they didn't speak any English at all. It was an immersion course. And I just made a game out of it, and I became pretty proficient, learned 3 dialects of Vietnamese. So when I got to Vietnam, I had been trained as an undercover agent, and I had this language skill. So I was recruited by the CIA to become an undercover agent, which you would say, well, how does some guy 6'4" work undercover in Vietnam? And the answer is you have to have a good cover mission. And my cover mission was I was liaison between the American and Vietnamese government for refugee programs in 15 refugee camps. So I lived in the camps, spoke with the people, and gathered a lot of intelligence, mainly with children. I had translated all of Aesop's fables into Vietnamese, and I would tell the kids Aesop's fables and Mother Goose stories and get them to start talking. And once you started them talking, they tell you everything. So, and that's what I did for a year.
Wow. I don't think that people here in El Paso know much of that story. You've not, I've been to a lot of conferences with you. I've heard you strum your guitar in Vietnamese and sing songs in Vietnamese, but I've never heard that story. I think that's amazing to hear that history. You know, my dad was a pilot in World War II and was shot down behind the enemy lines, and a French family saved him, and he was with them for 6 or 7 months, and they hid him behind a fake wall, and the young children were who they feared because they had 3 young boys in that family, and the Germans would come by and say, well, here's some candy, and have you seen anyone around here? And they said, well, just Uncle Pierre, but he's here and he's leaving tomorrow. And it was interesting to hear the stories of day-to-day life in that part of France in 1944 and 1945. But it's interesting to go back in time and hear the stories of how folks that people see every day in El Paso, what their history's been in the military.
Yeah, and you know, those are years that really molded me. I think taught me a lot about myself, what my abilities and capabilities were. I became very confident that I could actually do anything if I put my mind to it, and learned to take risk and reap the rewards. But I tell people today, they say, well, are you having a good day? And I tell them, I haven't had a bad day since Vietnam. So you just put things into perspective.
Let's talk about El Paso. That's my favorite topic. And I really do feel that these are the best years right now El Paso is the place to be. And a lot of it has to do with the work being done at the city. There's emerged a consensus now, I think, about where we're going to build the jobs, where we're going to go as a community, our brand as a regional economic enterprise here. And to me, it's been built around 4 major areas, topic areas. And the first one I want to talk about is mobility. We've always been a port. Our name is a port, El Paso del Norte. We have occupied this space east and west and north and south. When you look at the railroads going in 5 directions out of here, let's talk about the competitiveness of El Paso, Juarez, in southern New Mexico as a port. I want to focus on rail. What do you see happening? What's going to impact us in the future? And where do we need to position ourselves coming in the next few years? Because a lot's going to happen with rail.
Well, the rail solutions are extremely expensive, and I tell people that there's only one thing that moves slower than government, and that's the railroads. And trying to get the rail relocated is going to be a long-term project, but it probably makes the most sense for the region, and especially for downtown El Paso, to get the rail out of the downtown. I believe we have something like 78 rail crossings within the city limits of El Paso. If you don't think that impacts mobility, then you're not looking at the big picture. Every one of those rail crossings slows traffic down. I don't know how many trains a day that we have right now. I think it's in the 50s or 60s, but that number is going to double or triple over the next couple of years. They've already started double stacking almost every train that comes through El Paso. And we get no benefit from that. I mean, this is commerce that goes from point A to point B, and we're somewhere in between. We get no revenue out of it at all. All we get is putting up with the congestion that it causes, the noise of the trains coming through, and for the most part, there's no commerce happening from the rail that's in El Paso. So the solution is to move it out, and if we can get the rail moved out, then it opens up some very valuable real estate for us to do things like light rail and commuter rail. And it's really important for us to understand that no city has ever built their way out of congestion. You don't do it by building new roads. As a matter of fact, that entices more travel on the roads once you build them. But if you go to mass transit solutions, which has not been something that El Paso has really focused on probably in the last 25, 30 years, we've neglected mass transit. That's why last summer we had the Sun City meltdown as far as our Sun Metro was concerned. If you had to rely on a bus to get to work on time, I would say you probably would lose your job. And I've had people call me. One lady called me, she worked for the county, and she lived out in northeast El Paso, and she said, would you please call my boss and tell him it's not my fault that I was late to work 3 times this week. He's going to fire me. So I called him, and he told me, he said, you know, I need an employee. I don't need excuses. And she may be telling the truth, that her bus broke down one day and it didn't show up the next day, and it came in late the 3rd day. But that's 3 days that she wasn't at work when I wanted her there. And I just need an employee that's going to be there. I don't know whether she ended up losing her job. She never called me back. But it really showed what our weakness was as far as a mass transit system. Mm-hmm. And you know, you talk about great cities, Senator, and I think great cities have several things in common. One of those is they have a great mass transit system. The other is they have a great downtown. And the third, and if you look at cities all around the world, they have these 3 components. They may have others too, but that third component is great parks and open space. And if you look at El Paso, we don't make the mark on all 3 of those things. Our downtown, it's getting better, but it's not great yet. Our mass transit system is getting better, but it's not great yet. And our parks and open space, I mean, for years we let the developers give us money instead of parks, or give us raw land and say, well, that's a park, now develop it. But that's changing. And I really have to thank the city council that I have that supports some of these very progressive ideas to make El Paso a world-class city.
You know, I think things are moving in a great direction in El Paso in a lot of different reasons, a lot of different areas. But this whole idea of mobility really is the core of what makes great cities work, is that people get from A to B. It's low cost. They can get to work on time. It works. And actually, it's a good way to travel. People like it. They get in, they look around, they say, hey, this is a nice way to travel. I can listen to my iPod, or I can read the paper, or whatever. If you go to Austin right now, they have 32 miles of light rail that they have, that they're going to roll out here, I think, in the next 8 months. When you go up to Albuquerque, they just completed 85 miles. They took an existing rail line that was underused and led by Governor Bill Richardson, who you and I know very well. They just said, we're going to have this alternative use. They went to Bombardier, and I know you've had conversations with them, and said, how long will it take to do this? They did it in 3 years. And what I think is unusual now in this historic era is that you have gas prices rising. They're projected probably to be $7 at the end of 2010 per gallon, which is going to drive consumers to other choices. You're seeing it around the world. In places like Istanbul, gas is now $10 a gallon. And then you come back here and you also see this very historic movement of the centerpiece of North-South Rail, that BNSF line, FEDOMEX line, moving now over the mountains into San Jeronimo and Santa Teresa. So this line that has been the traditional connection north and south for rail is opened up now for a prime use as a connector for commuter rail, which is what cities are going to. So I see us being in a great position to, let's see what we can make possible with this city council, with this mayor, with the times ahead and the gas prices. I think people are going to demand it.
Well, and you know, being an international borderplex, when you think about mobility, you have to think about not just mobility on this side of the border, but mobility on the other side of the border. It's really like we're one city with 2 mayors. El Paso Juarez should be a hyphenated statement, because if you just look at the commuter crossings that we have, I think the number right now is about 10 million POV crossings that we have every year, just over one of our bridges alone. And pedestrian crossings are almost double that. So why do we have 20,000 people a day walking across a bridge. Yeah,
You and
um,
I went just the other day to participate with the governor of Chihuahua and his informe, letting the people know what was going on. And rather than wait in line at the bridge, we got
walked
out
back.
and walked back because the bridges really are non-functional
And,
now.
you know, I had my executive assistant drive the car over, and they got back 2.5 hours after we did. So I mean, they waited on the bridge 2.5 hours, and this was at what, 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. So you can imagine what it's like in the daytime. I look out my window from City Hall, and the bridge looks like a vertical parking lot. It's not it's not a bridge; it's a parking lot.
You know, I went and spent some time in Seattle, Vancouver transportation conferences, and they have a rail line there that goes from one city to the other. So you're going from the U.S. to Canada, and it doesn't stop because they've moved the customs to the point of origin, point of destination. And so you've got a very efficient movement of people that we could learn a lot from. But for the first time on their bridges, with their pedestrian and their truck traffic, they're beginning to see the lines that we've seen. And they can't believe it. They say, we don't understand why you've lived with this for all these years. And we're saying, welcome to the reality of the southern
world.
border. And I think there's an alliance to be made there that I hope we can use come January with the new administration to try and solve some of these long-standing problems of mobility, because truly, I think that's one of our strengths. I want to visit with you a little bit about BRAC. You and I have worked on this since we got into office. I think it offers huge opportunities and potential for El Paso. Now we've got the other side of BRAC, which is the infrastructure, the human capital that we have to put into place, the opportunities for jobs, dependence, what's going to happen there, housing, some of these issues. Let's talk about the Austin side of that. You're going to host a town hall meeting format. We're going to pull people together and say, okay, let's lay out the solutions for the nurses we're going to need, the doctors we're going to need. We're going to lay out the solutions for some of the housing that we're going to go get. And so that's coming up here in Austin pretty soon. What do you see as those priorities from your perspective?
Okay, let me tell you from the Pentagon's perspective, because they're the ones who challenged us when we were going through the BRAC hearings, and they wanted to know, could we meet what their criteria was? And I think one of the generals we talked to said it best. He said, you know, Mayor, when we move our soldiers to Fort Bliss, we can put them in tents if we have to. But when they take their family members with them, we have some additional requirements. Can you meet the housing requirement? We'll house 40% of them. Can you house the other 60%? And I told him, yes, we can do that. And he said, and with those additional people, and at that time we thought the number was going to be 35,000 with family members. We didn't realize that we were really talking close to 90,000 people. He said, with those additional people, you're going to have mobility issues. Are you willing to invest in the infrastructure to make sure that we can move soldiers on and off of Fort Bliss and over to Biggs Field? Are you willing to do that? And we told him, yes, we'll do that. And he said, and William Beaumont can just barely handle what they have right now. We have the commitment from the civilian community to help with the medical needs through TRICARE. And that means you have to have new doctors, new nurses, new radiology technicians, new physical therapists. Are you willing to commit to doing that? We told them, yes, we'll do that also. So we started developing programs on the medical side. And you know, we started those, 12 years ago, when we talked about where does our community go now that NAFTA has taken the jobs out of El Paso. What does our future hold? And we said the Medical Center of the Americas. We'll talk about that hopefully in more detail. But those were the main issues that Fort Bliss was interested in, that the Pentagon was interested in. So those are our major challenges right now. How do we address the housing issue and make it affordable? And how do we? And the final issue was schools. No soldier wants to relocate his family to a town where the educational opportunities are second class. They want first class educational opportunities. They want schools that perform well. They want nice schools to send their kids to. And they even have a thing when the soldiers are looking to locate out here, they have an internet connection that they can look through the World Wide Web, and it shows them what all the schools are like, what the educational attainment issues are in those schools. how they do on the tax test. So, and you know that these soldiers are being briefed before they even locate to a community. And that's when they decide, you know, am I going to go 3 years to Fort Bliss by myself, or am I going to bring the family with me? And it determines what neighborhood they live in, uh, uh, whether they bring their kids or they don't bring their kids. So those are some big challenges for us. And knowing that you have a challenge, you have to come up with a plan as to how you're going to address the challenge. And I think that's what we've been pretty good at doing. We know what the input is, we know what we want coming out of it, and now we're connecting the dots to make sure we get there.
Well, we've got some work to do this coming session, as we did last session. Last session was all about infrastructure and making sure we had the tech dot piece lined up, and then looking at primarily EPISD and making sure that that piece, the building of the new schools, how do we get 300 teachers into that district, how do we create the kinds of educational environments that troops are going to need on the scale that we were talking about then. And I think this session we're talking now about the next stage, next sequencing, which is healthcare professionals and the balance of what I call the human infrastructure. How do we get the social services into place, and how do we do these housing issues in a pretty interesting environment after the credit crisis, how we get the money to fund some of these housing projects to scale. So I think we're moving on them. We've certainly seen great leadership at the city on your behalf, on the committee that you put together, the consultants that are coming down here with SAIC. So I feel real confident, and in the next few days we'll have the conference that you're hosting to really identify with some clarity what the detail's going to be, so we can get those bills working.
Well, one of the things that we really need out of Austin, I think, is looking at the teacher issue. Right now we have people who are coming in, they're spouses of military soldiers, and they may have teaching credentials in another state, but they're not certified to teach here. We have students who are coming in, and they've gone through a different course curriculum, in other words, the focus in another state may be entirely different. They come into El Paso as a senior, and then they say, well, you know, you've been on the wrong trajectory. You're a senior, but you're going to have to go back and do all this freshman, sophomore, junior work. And I think we need help with those educational criteria. I know we tried last session to get that taken care of, and I can understand where people were coming from when they said, well, we're not going to let anyone graduate without attaining all of the levels of education that Texas requires. We're not going to sell anybody short. But if they've been focusing on a different trajectory, then I think we have to look at that. And how do we fast track getting those other trained teachers to be certified in the state of Texas?
Well, those issues really we handled in Senate Bill 652. Certification of teachers, the waiver, coming in and giving them time to go get the credentials, getting up to speed at UTEP. The issue of military compacts for children, state to state, countries to countries. I think those issues I feel fairly confident of. Where we do need to work on is we also passed a bill that let retired teachers come back and work in some of these schools.
That was beneficial.
That's working. Where we do need to do some work is how do we get the kinds of types of teachers that we're going to need in math and science particularly. And then the whole health professionals piece, I think, is the one that we really need to lay the groundwork for, to say, if you've got folks coming back that are nurses, how do we get a provisional license to work in a hospital here? If they're a doctor coming back from somewhere in Germany, how does that work, where they can get in and do the work that they were doing last week in another country, the identical procedure, but they just don't have a Texas license yet. Right. Those are some issues that I think I have great confidence will get done. But as we look into the future, the numbers we're talking about are pretty
phenomenal.
Significant. When you're talking about 2,200 new nurses to fund the TRICARE need and 650 doctors, I don't know another community that's looking out there to say, hey, we need to go get 650 doctors.
One of the big weaknesses in that, Senator, is the people who train and teach nurses. And if you look at it and you say, well, how can I make more money? Being a nurse or training a nurse? And the answer is being a nurse. I think we have to have a different compensation system than we have right now. Otherwise, there's no incentive for some of these nurses who have got their education, got the on-the-job experience, for them to pass that on to the next generation of healthcare professionals. So that's something that really needs to be addressed. We need incentives to get some of the people who are good nurses and good physical therapists and good radiology technicians for them to become teachers and pass their skills on to the next generation.
Well, we've got exciting things going on in mobility. We've got issues and challenges, but I truly think being an international border port is one of our great strengths. We've got the Medical Center of the Americas up and going with the first medical school in 30 years and the kinds of connections that we're going to make to William Beaumont and Fort Bliss. We've got the issues with manufacturing now and companies relocating in Juarez and back here. But I want to talk a little bit about you. I don't think a lot of the folks in El Paso know, with our remaining time here, that you're now a statewide leader as the head of the Texas Municipal League. We ought to let folks know that.
Yeah. And you know, I'm humbled to be able to serve in that capacity, especially during the legislative session. And this is the first time El Paso will have a president of TML since Justin Williams. Susie Azar almost made it, but then I think she had a stormwater issue that cost her reelection. But this is a great opportunity to go to Austin, and it'll give me access to many of the legislators to tell not only the story for Texas, but the story for El Paso, and let them know what's important. I think it raises our visibility in the state to have the mayor of El Paso serving as the president of TML. And I didn't realize this when I took that job on, but I'm now also required to attend some of the major cities initiatives or the major state initiatives. So I have to take a trip to Fort Lauderdale, for example, where the presidents of all the municipal leagues around the country will be getting together and talking about what impacts all of us. So I'm really excited about doing this, and there's some really important issues. Taxation caps, property values caps, I think is something. The eminent domain issue, I think, is going to be key. And the message that we're going to focus on at TML is leave the decisions with local municipalities, because what fits for El Paso may not fit for Longview, Texas, may not fit for Rockport, may not fit for Houston. And Texas is such a big state. There's a lot of diversity in the way that all the different cities are, what their needs are. Some are rural, some are metropolitan, some are combinations of both. So we think that local decision making is going to be really important.
Well, you're in for a great treat. I just finished as a chair of a 10-state border region, and we went all over the hemisphere, Mexico City to Canada and all points in between, to try and look at some of these issues. And you find out just how big Texas is when they call you and say, can you get over here to Beaumont, and find out that you're talking about 800 miles. And we know you'll do a great job, and we're proud that you're there, Mayor, and I'll see you in Austin a lot. I guarantee that TML goes to everybody's offices and talks to them about cities' issues and capacity and infrastructure issues. So we'll see you in Austin a bunch come January. And I want to thank you for being on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you as a guest. Hope we can do it again, maybe from Austin when we broadcast the show come in January. We'll be doing it from Austin.
I look forward to that.
And I want to just again thank you. We've had a great morning with Mayor John Cook, who is now the head of a statewide organization called the Texas Municipal League, and he'll be having a lot of duties down in Austin come in January. But I wanted to thank you all for joining us today, and until next time, this has been Austin in Focus, and thank you so much.